and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, security in the spotlight. Defense and military chiefs from China, the U.S. meet their Asia-Pacific counterparts in Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue in an effort to breach the stormy waters of the South China Sea. And Euro 2016, French police beef up security for millions of fans ahead of the European Football Championship this month amid fears of terror attacks. Will normalcy prevail? We begin today's show with the annual Shangri-La Dialogue, one of Asia's largest annual security summit, which kicks off in Singapore Friday. Delegations from around 30 countries, including military officials from China, the U.S., and many others, are joining the event. The forum will start with a keynote address given by the Thai Prime Minister and end on Sunday after a series of open and closed-door conversations. Let's take a look.
One of Asia's largest annual security forums, the 15th Shangri-La Dialogue, kicked off on Friday in Singapore. The three-day event gathers defense ministers and military chiefs and officials from around 30 countries, including China, the United States, Japan, and more. The dialogue was launched in 2002 by the London-based think tank, the International Institute of Strategic Studies, and the Singaporean Defense Ministry. It gets its name from the location of the meeting, the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore. The summit has become a key platform to explore resolutions for security issues and promote security cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. China's military delegation is led by Admiral Sung Jin-guo, Deputy Chief of the Joint Staff Department of the Central Military Commission. He is set to deliver a speech and hold talks with his counterparts from various countries.
那么参加本次香格里拉对话会的主要目的
During the event, we will publicize and introduce President Xi Jinping's major ideas on building the community of common destiny and the security management mode with Asian characteristics. And we will share how Chinese military maintains world and regional security and stability.
This year, several key topics such as the South China Sea, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, anti-terrorism, and security challenges in Asia are likely to dominate discussion.
One of the characteristics of Shangri-La Dialogue is to focus on the hottest issue. So you actually would hear such words like challenges, uncertainties, all these kind of words.
Newly elected Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has signaled greater independence in dealing with international issues, causing uncertainty in ironclad U.S.-Philippine relations. Last week, U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter warned China against building
the Great Wall of self-isolation.
China has dismissed it as an attempt to divert attention from U.S. plans to beef up its military forces in the Asia-Pacific. Amid rising tensions in the region, the dialogue offers an opportunity for all sides to find common ground and work more closely together toward regional peace and stability.
About the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, we are joined here in Beijing. Mr. Yang Xiyu, who is a senior fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Sir, welcome to our program. Meanwhile, joining us from Washington, D.C. inside the United States, we're having Dean Chung, who is a senior research fellow at the Asia Studies Center of the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. First of all, this is the question, and I wouldn't hesitate to ask at the very beginning of our discussion, is this really, Mr. Chung, likely to be a showdown between U.S. and China?
No, I think that for both China and the United States, there is recognition that as key economic partners, as both major countries, we cannot afford to have outright hostility between our two countries. Clearly, we have different perspectives. We do have some differences of national interest, but I don't think that this will be a showdown of any sort between China and the United States.
Mr. Chung, if I could remind you of what Secretary Carter talked about, your defense secretary, before coming to the summit in Singapore. He was talking about building he called strategic structures for the United States and its allies in the Asia Pacific. And China consider some important components, as U.S. see it, of this structure very vulnerable to China, in fact, and influencing China's basic interest in the region. What do you make of this? Yes, on the one hand, people realizing it's important for the complicated relations to remain good, but at the same time, concrete actions would destroy that relation.
Well, I think both sides are engaging in concrete actions that the other side perceives as troubling. So, for example, China's efforts to build artificial islands, reports about the creation of an air defense identification zone in the South China Sea are alarming to the United States. Similarly, American efforts to create a stronger regional architecture, for obvious reasons, certain elements within China are going to view that as threatening. Part of the purpose of the Shangri-La Dialogue is to improve dialogue, conversation, so that each side can better understand the other side's perspective.
Now let me go to you, Mr. Yang. When we talk about the possible conflict between China and the United States, hopefully it's not likely to happen during this year's Shangri-La Dialogue, but nobody could guarantee two things. One is the South China Sea, and the other thing, of course, is the DPRK nuclear issue, which would lead to, as the U.S. argue, a THAAD system to be established with South Korea. So let me go to some of these topics separately. First of all, South China Sea. What about that? You got a lot of surveillance coming from the U.S. in the region, even though China's ships are keeping a distance between the U.S. counterparts and China's own, but there could be possibility of conflict.
Well, theoretically, it is correct that there could be high possibility of the conflicts by any incident or accident. Fortunately, both sides, both governments has determined to avoid any kind of movement, although the sharp differences on South China Sea, by striking a code between the two navies and also very frequent and effective dialogues between the male to male, plus any other hotlines. For example, a few days later, ICE and the ED will be held again in Beijing, gathering a lot of senior officials from both sides. So a lot of channels between the two sides can be prevent from happening things. However, such differences and possible confrontation on South China Sea really impede both of the great countries from getting greater interests, common interests. So that's the very bad. Furthermore, the possible we can never say we can prevent the dangers of a confrontation. So it's a really hard issue, really need to be addressed in urgent manner.
Mr. Chung, let me go through some of the documents that both China and the United States have with one another to guarantee what you and Mr. Yang argue. One is as many as 90 different kinds of mechanisms of dialogues and hotlines in economic, political, as well as in the military side. And then there is, on the military side, two important documents. One is the notification of major military actions both sides should have towards one another. The other thing is what you call rules of behavior for safety of maritime and air encounters. These are all technical details that likely to help us prevent crisis. But as Mr. Yang just argued, Mr. Chung rather, what do you make of the South China Sea preventing the two countries' militaries getting closer as both sides would wish to, and what kinds of strategic views both sides have to take at this moment when looking at the issue of South China Sea?
Well, to begin with, I think that sometimes we exaggerate the impact of the South China Sea on U.S.-China military-to-military relations. Notice that, for example, China is still invited to attend the RIMPAC 2016 multinational military exercise later this summer. China was invited and attended the 2014 RIMPAC. This is despite the ongoing tensions in the South China Sea. I personally look forward to when China will invite the United States to attend perhaps one or more of China's major military exercises. The South China Sea is obviously an irritant in U.S.-China relations. It is an important consideration because there are so many parties to it. But I think that we should not make it into the only focus of U.S.-China relations, even on the military side.
What about you, Mr. Yang?
Well, I think if you look at the, let me put it this way, if you look at the South China Sea issue a few years ago, that was not hot issue at all between China and the U.S. But why hot now? Simply because of the changing of U.S. attitudes towards this issue. In short, previously, U.S. took a low-profile, no-hand-in policy on the controversial issue on South China Sea, say take no position. However, in recent 2 years, with Mr. Cheng mentioned, with the construction by Chinese side on island, U.S. increased their involvements directly, indirectly, many ways on the South China Sea issue, including send warships, warplanes very close to Chinese islands. So why is that? Because they said, oh, Chinese construction calls American attention. But my question is, the construction and Filipinos have been there for more than 10 years.
All right.
You know,
so
China
what are you
make a
trying to
reaction.
suggest here? What are you trying to suggest here, sir? If you could give one direct response.
Very simple.
To Mr.
Okay,
Chang.
very simple. We have several options to address this issue. Unfortunately, U.S. choose the worst, say, confrontation manner.
Mr.
So
Chang,
just go to the table.
Mr. Chang, have you
talk
ever
this.
thought about that? I mean, the other two options that Mr. Yang did not clearly specifically laid out, but it certainly could be thought about. Mr. Chang.
Well, I think that there's always room for more dialogue, and the SNED talks, the various defense consultative talks. As you said, there are 90 different mechanisms already in place for U.S. and China to talk more about these issues. I would, however, note that even before there arose the issue of the islands, which is very recent as a topic, there was unfortunately the Impeccable incident, and of course before that the EP3 incident in 2001. Both of these have unfortunately shaped both U.S. and Chinese perceptions of each other.
All right. Well, there is certainly no question a lot of strategic distrust, and also some assume strategic calculations from both sides toward one another in this issue. Whether that will be reflected during this year's Shangri-La Dialogue, which likely to become a debate, is still a big question mark. Talking about the Shangri-La Dialogue, it is not just China and the United States, but many other countries inside the Asia-Pacific region that are participating. For example, from Singapore, and now we are having on the phone Mr. Lin Tai-wei, who is an adjunct research professor at the National University of Singapore. Mr. Lin, welcome to our program.
Yes, thank you.
It's great to have you. I'm sure Singapore now is busy working on the scheduling and also the service of all the conference attendees. But the question remains, that is, what about the countries in Asia-Pacific region? Where are they going to stand when you have U.S. and China into a sharp conflict during this conference? Is the host, the Singapore, prepared for that?
I think the different countries in the region are looking for dialogue and frank exchanges. And also they have in the background contextualized against this talk the hopes for peaceful and de-escalation of tensions and conflict. And of course the South China Sea, as your guest has mentioned, is an important issue. But on top of those issues, there are also other issues on the table, including the North Korean Peninsula missile crisis, and also issues of cybersecurity, and also issues where there are common stance amongst the countries in the region. This includes capacity building issues, and also common stance on non-proliferation, and also a topic which is also very important and frequently mentioned in the media, which is the prevention of extremism and terrorism prevention measures. So all these issues are on the table, and they are there for discussion. There are over 20 delegations, and amongst these 20 delegations, many are high-level security
Right.
officials.
So your point is?
So this is a very good, sorry?
So your point is?
Over 20, I think it's 20 or 20, over 20 or 21 delegations that are gathered in the dialogue. So it's a good opportunity for officials at the senior level to communicate with each other, and also to be able to reach for common grounds on issues like combating terrorism and extremism. Yeah.
Okay. We've already heard from you a big list of topics, of course, already outlined by the conference earlier. But the question is, what are likely to be the attitudes of the host, Singapore, and some of the other Southeast Asian countries that are involved in conflicts, possible conflicts, at least about the territory and also sovereignty in the South China Sea, likely to react if the United States, for example, lead with some provocative words, as the Chinese would wonder. Mr. Lim, what about that? We have already heard from Mr. John McCain, who is the Senate chairman for the Armed Services Committee from the United States. He's likely to join later together with the defense minister of the U.S. Of course, some likely to be some harsh words towards China. So at the time, what would be the reactions coming from Southeast Asian countries, particularly Singapore, who Mr. Carter regarded as the closest ally of the United States in the Asia-Pacific region, as he said?
Well, Southeast Asia is a very diverse region, and there are 10 countries within ASEAN, and each of them have good relations with
for example,
major
Singapore?
powers in the region. Sorry?
For example, Singapore? My question is more about Singapore, the country you're from.
Singapore has good relations with major powers in the region, and as the host of the forum, it hopes that there can be some issues of cooperation between the dialogue partners at the forum, and also some frank exchanges of ideas. And this could help to contribute to greater understanding between countries and members that are represented at the forum. Given that this is these are senior level officials, it is a good opportunity for them to do so at a particular forum with the issues on the table.
All right, Lin Tan-Wai, Adjunct Research Fellow at the National University of Singapore. Thank you so much, Mr. Lim, for being with us. We talk about many of the countries in Southeast Asia. One of those is the U.S. important ally, the Philippines. Will have a new president in the office at the end of June. Take a look at this. The new leaders have sent some signals right before the Shangri-La Dialogue, keeping the U.S. at a distance, as he said. He said that his country needs to chart a course more independent of the United States, and also in a sign of a possibly warming view toward China. The coming in president, Duterte, called Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, a great president. He also said that his administration, quote, is bent on dealing with China through peaceful dialogue. There's no other way but to go bilateral, end of quote. Mr. Yang here with us in Beijing. Of course, Singapore, rather the Philippines, was filing a case against China. China did not accept this case and also find a lot of loopholes in the arguments by the Philippines. But when you look at the incoming president of the Philippines taking a very different stance, so how will all of these moving factors likely to shape this year's Shangri-La Dialogue?
Well, I think the new Filipino president may probably become a game changer of the existing game among players. Originally, the issue was the issue between Chinese and the Philippines. But in recent months, it suddenly become the issue between China and the United States. And the U.S. President Obama said China should go rule of law. However, in terms of rule of law, by year 2000, China and ASEAN countries struck DOC, and China and the Philippines struck several agreements and consensus by bilateral dialogues on the controversial issue. And then the Filipino go the wrong way, go away from the original right path. But now the new president sent a signal that they are going to return. So the returning policy will change the existing game.
Very interesting over there, new development. Another new development, Mr. Chung, we want to brief you is about the issue concerning the Korean Peninsula. There has been strong argument coming from Washington for the establishment of the THAAD system, which China finds quite provocative on its border. South Korean officials, right before Shangri-La Dialogue, was talking about there's no, he said, no discussion about the THAAD system during Shangri-La Dialogue. However, from Mr. Carter, your defense secretary, he is emphasizing on the significance of this system right before coming into Shangri-La Dialogue. What are we seeing here, and what does that mean, this Shangri-La Dialogue discussion between U.S. and many of its allies, both in Northeast Asia and also in Southeast Asia?
Well, to begin with, it's always been puzzling to me why China feels that THAAD is a problem, since THAAD is intended to protect South Korea from North Korean missiles. And as we've heard from President Xi, China wants stability on the Korean Peninsula. The greatest threat to stability on the Korean Peninsula is not from South Korea, but from North Korea. And I think that Secretary of Defense comments go to that point, that THAAD is intended to protect South Korea from North Korea. In this context, then, insofar as North Korea's nuclear proliferation activities, the constant threat of a North Korean nuclear test is always hanging over everyone in all of Asia, North and South Asia. This is something that hopefully will be discussed more extensively. And I can say that certainly here in Washington, there is always the hope that the U.S. and China can in fact cooperate more on dealing with the regime in Pyongyang.
All right, Mr. Yang, final comments before we go. Briefly.
Well, THAAD system could be a stepstone towards the trilateral anti-missile systems in North Asia led by the U.S. plus U.S., Japan, and South Korea. That will be the game changer of the strategic balance in this region, causing more instabilities. That's why China opposed that. That's not the defensive issue from North Korea for South Korea. It's a game changer of the strategic instability and imbalance between China and the United States, and Russia and the U.S.
All right, we are already seeing quite some debates between the two of you. We are sure, at least in those closed-door encounters in the Shangri-La Dialogue, there will be a lot of more intense debates. Thank you so much for the two of you for being with us. Yang Xiyu here in Beijing and Din Zhang joining us from Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us, and have a great weekend. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Euro 2016, France mounts a massive security operation to keep millions of fans out of harm's way for this month's European Football Championship amid concerns of high terror risks. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. From June the 10th to July the 10th, a whole month, soccer fans from all over the world will gather in France for the Euro 2016. But the security is a high concern, as the United States has issued a travel alert warning its citizens to be careful of possible terrorist attacks. With the event kicking off in a week, how prepared is Europe, particularly France? Before going to our discussion, first let's take a look at this.
For the love of the game. The Euro 2016 Football Championship will kick off in France next week. For fans, it is a long-awaited sporting event. But on Tuesday, the United States warned its citizens of possible terrorist attacks at the event.
We're certainly not discouraging travel to Europe or other destinations or even these events. Just that we want to make sure that that they stay vigilant, that they stay aware as they attend or they travel.
But the warning has far from ruined the holidays for American tourists in Paris.
Actually, I embrace the security. I don't mind it because that means that the country is on their toes and attentive to what's going on. things are in their hands and we can go on as tourists and enjoy the city without any worries.
France is already under a state of emergency following last year's assaults, which left 130 people dead and many more wounded. In March, 32 people died in neighboring Belgium when suicide blasts hit Brussels airport and a metro station. Both the Paris and the Brussels attacks were claimed by ISIL, the Islamic State. Just last month, ISIL also twice attacked Real Madrid fans in Iraq, killing nearly 30. Seen as a product of Western society, football events are often the targets of extremism. To avoid a similar tragedy, France's state of emergency was extended to include the tournament, and it also plans to roll out anti-drone technology as another precaution. More than 90,000 police, soldiers, and private security agents are being deployed as well.
I will be at the command post where I will hear all the events that are taking place as they happen, as well as the reaction of all the government services that are mobilized, be that the police or emergency services.
It seems for now, France is going at full throttle to ensure the safety of all fans at this 4-yearly event, which many hope will be an assurance that normalcy still lives on.
For more on the security of Euro 2016, we are firstly joined in the United States, Washington, D.C. by Mr. Philip Crowley, who is a former United States Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, and we are hoping a French guest will join us later in our program. First of all, Mr. Crowley, may I ask you about the nature of the travel alert? Of course, we've seen from 911, the U.S. has been issuing continuously different kinds of travel alerts for its citizens around the world. But what is the level of this travel alert? How serious is it?
Well, there's an affirmative obligation in the United States by law that if the government has security concerns, it finds a way to communicate those concerns, to its citizens. And as your report suggested, there's a very, very difficult balance that's trying to be achieved here. We're trying to tell our citizens, continue to do what you want. If you are a football fan, of course, attend the European Games, but understand that as we did see in the Paris attack, the militants tried to get inside a football stadium with France and Germany playing a friendly, and there's nothing new about this. Sadly, go back to the 1972 Olympics. Obviously, the Black September organization attacked the Israeli Olympic team, and so ever since then, at major sporting events like this, it is a target of opportunity for militants, and in some way, this public demonstration of vigilance can ideally make this a much more difficult target to attack.
We have noticed that even the French defense minister this time are going to Asia to attend the Shangri-La Dialogue for this year. Of course, that's a gathering of all the defense ministers. Mr. Crowley, one could argue this is really another step that France and some of the European countries are taken in order to make sure there can be more collaboration of securities during the Euro 2016. But how much can the other countries do outside the European continent to help?
Well, I think for major events, looking ahead to the the Rio Games coming up in a few weeks. On the one hand, we have this challenge of the Zika virus, but on the other hand, the countries in and around the Olympic site, together with all of the others who are participating in the games, will be collaborating to try to determine if they sense any chatter, as we call it in the intelligence world, that would suggest that there's an active plot against the game. So I think sadly this is the environment in which we live, and major sporting events are a ripe target for militants who might try to send a message for a variety of reasons to a variety of countries.
Right, indeed. Now I'm told by my producer we are having a French panelist joining us from Paris, Professor Joab Tope, American graduate School in Paris. Professor Toker, welcome to our program. This is the third time, Professor, France will host the European Football Championship. A total of 2.5 million spectators are expected in the stadium for the games, with 1 million foreign visitors due to arrive in France, and a total of 51 matches taking place in 10 venues across France. This is a big security project we are talking about. Given France past the brief history over the past 2 years about terrorist attacks and some of the disconnections in terms of intelligence sharing, how confident are you about the security situation this time during the Euro 2016?
Well, it's very difficult to give sort of a global answer to that, especially 1 week before the first match kicks on, and on television, namely, everything could be proven and illustrated later on. But I would say in a synthetic way that yes, France is ready. France is also conscious of how shaky that kind of readiness might be, because we're speaking about a very different kind of enemy. We're speaking, some French specialists say right now, about sort of neo-terrorism, new terrorism type, in which the types of surprises, not only on the operational level in terms of security and intelligence, but also in terms of imagining new types of targets, new types of operational modes. Right. All these constitute some kind of confrontation which is rather sharp and which could unfortunately include some very unpleasant surprises. But when you look at the terrain, when you look at the concrete efforts, when you look at the way the gendarmerie, the special police forces, the extra manpower which had been mobilized over the last 18 months in France and elsewhere in Europe are preparing concretely those 4 weeks of football games, then one should be overall rather confident.
Well, Professor Toker, I have to ask you about this. Yes, indeed, there are 15% increase of the budget when it comes to security during this time's Euro 2016. There's also 90,000 personnel, 90,000 we are talking about, all over France, trying to guarantee the security of this big specific event. But this is really the biggest soft target, one could argue, for the year when it comes to the calculation of the terrorists. How much do we know? Of course, you're not an intelligence officer, but how much do we know about the way that the terrorists operate, given the previous experiences of France, the incidents happened there, and how much can France and other countries do at the time when you also have so many different kinds of crises, even involving migration?
You're right. Things could be interconnected here, well beyond the immediate confrontation between those minds, if I may say so, who try to plan as much damage as possible in terms of terrorism and the counter-terrorism effort. But you see, my colleague in Washington said a few minutes ago in the conversation, you know, these are the times we're living in. So it's part of an overall reality, which indeed is a security reality with all the unpredictable elements. It is a political reality as well, because football is politics. As a matter of fact, a very specific type of political event which indeed unites societies in a way which is rather unique in comparison to some many others political events on the nation's or on a continent's agenda. So yes, these new days of ours right now do include in their, how should I say, quality of life, quote unquote, ingredient, fear and anxiety and unpredictable elements which may rise out of terrorist malicious activities. This is part of our day's reality. So it should be integrated. It is indeed integrated in the overall image, and this is why I say that the fact that the overall feeling in...
If that is the fact,
go ahead.
If that is the fact and reality people have to accept, then there has to be mechanisms and also ways to deal with it, at least to the extent as much as we can. Therefore, Mr. Crowley, how much of intelligence sharing both mechanism-wise and also in terms of operation and implementation, can be done during this very intense 1 month inside Europe between the United States, which is well known for its intelligence capabilities, and also its European counterparts?
Well, I think intelligence sharing is vital to this. It can always be improved, and I think that in the aftermath of what we've seen in Paris and Brussels, also here in the United States, there's an acceleration of that intelligence sharing effort, recognizing that you have, different legal constructs that authorities have to overcome. I think we have to understand the threat a little bit in terms of you're trying to identify and interdict specific networks like we saw who were responsible for the Paris attacks and the Brussels airport attack. On the other hand, you're also dealing with self-activated individuals who may be connected to a militant group like the Islamic State by social media, and their message is attack what you can get to wherever you are in whatever form that you can. If we think back to the Sochi Olympics in 2014, the site itself was well protected, but there was some terrorist activity in the weeks leading up to the games, railroad stations being hit and so forth. So in this particular case in Europe, for example, just in the last couple of days, you had a plot that was detected and intercepted in Germany. So these militants don't necessarily have to get to the various stadia in France. They can just find a way, because the focus will be on Europe in the coming days, attack Europe wherever it can, in whatever form it can, to try to gain the kind of attention that they're looking for.
Professor Toker, therefore, that's a very important question that we are talking about. That is whether France, during this one intense month, will pick up all the clues coming from its allies, both inside Europe and elsewhere. And related to that, how to avoid overreaction, because that could be another extreme that the efforts could go and eventually could destroy the fun of the game. So very delicate balance, it seems, Professor Toker.
Right you are. Very delicate balance indeed. This is precisely where those who are the decision makers, let them be within the security, intelligence or political community, this is in their hands. How do you balance things intelligently, and how far can you stretch risks that you take, calculated risks which you eliminate? Because the problem is not only the cooperation between different intelligence services in Europe and elsewhere in America and elsewhere, it's also the kind of intelligence you apply on the data you accumulate. Namely, where is it that you really think that what you have in front of your eyes in terms of proofs or indications is really on operational grounds, and therefore you do something concrete about it. And because the amount and the dimensions of and the quantity of information is huge, this is part of, yes, a political sort of judgment which is not limited to the domain of those who are the professional security executives. And the balances are delicate, and when the errors unfortunately might be taken, it may exceed that perimeter that we are familiar with right now, and this is precisely the risk calculated.
Okay, and Mr. Crowley, all of these are happening not only with the existence of terrorism, with the ever-increasing security budget inside Europe, and also the migration crisis inside Europe. It is also going hand in hand with some of those scandals concerning soccer worldwide, and Europe is not an exception. So it seems that there are so many layers all at the same time, adding pressure to the security, in a way, efforts by all countries, particularly France. How much do you think the French government will be able to, together with allies inside Europe, handle this with all different layers of pressures?
Well, you loaded a lot into that question.
Yes,
I mean, let's put aside the corruption issues that FIFA is trying to deal with. Yeah, but I would simply say, there's a larger responsibility for us who are sports fans or football fans, and that we should celebrate these games that will be coming up. Not just in France with football, but in Rio, with the Olympics. if these are things that militants think are Western and somehow represent the infidel, non-believer community, the best thing that we can do is have these games go on, have people celebrate them, welcome the excitement on the pitch. And let them come off. And should something tragic happen, I think what has been inspiring to us all, whether it's the Charlie Hebdo attacks or the attacks a year ago in Paris, is how the French people themselves, responded to this. They were not going to be intimidated by these extremists, and it's that kind of message back to the militants that ultimately, moves them, appropriately, to be seen as a fringe group and something that the larger community has to ultimately combat.
All right, and before we go, final one sentence or two from both of you. How should we balance that? Security vis-a-vis fun. Professor Toker.
Well, I will be perhaps slightly more welcoming the question you had put to Washington a minute ago in Beijing.
All right.
I do think that there is some kind of interconnection between all these elements. Let them be corruption, let them be sports, let them be public enthusiasm, let them be terrorism and anxiety, which are cause for, because they do build up the overall nature of this. If you take it as it comes as a whole, and just be intelligent enough in that balance, would find to affront it.
Mr. Crowley, final words.
I just think that we can do both things. We can live the way that we live, and we can be vigilant at the same time.
That is very important. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. A week from now, Euro 2016, we're all looking forward to those exciting moments. Thank you. Joab Toker, Philip Crowley. Thank you for being with us. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night and have a great weekend.